Welcome, everybody, to our inaugural show of Mindful Techie Tuesday. My name is Carlos Gonzalez. I'm here with Miko Marquette Whitlock. Miko, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We are about to start these weekly conversations for the month of May that are focused around 2020 and an opportunity to do some goal resetting. So Michael being an expert in the field, we've wanted him to come on board and uh, join this conversation and primarily really lead our dialogue around how, in the midst of this pandemic, what are some of the tools or areas that we can focus on to kind of click reset on 2020, as we all probably have been caught off guard. And so now more than ever is a good opportunity to get back on track. So Miko, without further ado, let me hand it off to you. Maybe you can do a quick introduction about yourself, some of the work that you're doing, before we kind of jump into our discussion here.
Yeah, thank you, Carlos, for hosting this conversation and for having me on for this first edition of Mindful Techie Tuesdays. So I am Miko Marco Whitlock, the founder and CEO of an organization called Mindful Techie. And through that organization, I work with change makers to find work-life balance and tech-life balance in a digital world, and so that they can do their best work and live their best lives at the same time. And I know that over the last several months, the last several weeks, many of us have been caught off guard by the pandemic. And I'm just like many of the folks out there who were caught off guard. So over the past several weeks, much of the work that I do as in terms of speaking, training, and coaching with the professionals and organizations that I work with has previously been partly virtual, part in person, but essentially all of that has shifted online now. So I have been working with organizations that are dealing with the transition to working remotely, needing support with trying to get online learning off the ground if they haven't done those things before, and really using the work that I do with mindfulness to take a mindfulness-based approach to addressing the anxiety and the issues around well-being and adjustments that folks are having as we settle into this new phase of what's happening with the pandemic. So with that work, one of the things I've noticed is that lots of folks feel like their year had just started and they were having ambitious goals and plans, what they wanted to do with their career and with their life. Then things started to shut down, and people are starting to wonder now what next. So what happens? When do we actually get back to quote unquote normal? And how do we actually do that? Is that possible? Do we give up? Do we just throw in the towel? And that's why having this conversation today is so important, because one of the things I want people to understand is that you can do a reset on the year. You can go back to the drawing board, and we can talk about some ways that you can revise or recommit to, or perhaps reimagine the goals and plans that you already had, knowing that the situation has changed in terms of the pandemic, but we had definitely have an opportunity to figure out, in spite of this challenge that we're experiencing right now, how do we actually move forward? So that's a little bit about me and what I've been doing and why we're having this conversation today.
Great, Miko. Thanks for sharing that background. I mean, as you mentioned, right, like we've all been kind of blindsided by this and have had to figure out a way to do some level of adjusting to our day-to-day activities and really reacting to what's happening now. But I think this conversation will probably give us a lot of good ideas and tools to switching that reactiveness to being a little more proactive about steps going forward. So you shared a little bit about your work. Can you share a little bit about what you are doing to adjust to your new normal?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So in terms of my adjustment to the new normal, one of the things that has been super helpful for me is going back to the original plan that I set out for the years. As I mentioned, most of the work that I do in terms of the area of training, coaching, and online courses and things of that nature for the organizations and teams that I support, a lot of that is online and virtual. And so the shift that I've had to make, the adjustment I've had to make is to say, well, I've set a goal to be able to be of service, to have an impact by attending a certain number of professional development opportunities and conferences. I've set a goal to be able to serve and do a certain number of in-person trainings for organizations that are in need. And what I've said for myself is that plan, that vision, that goal is still valid. I just have to think about how I get there in a different way. And so the adjustment that I've been able to make is to really take a step back to figure out what do I have in my control, and what I have in my control is the fact that I can continue to offer what I'm offering, but I have to do it in a different way. So that's been the biggest adjustment for myself. I know that for lots of other folks and organizations out there, it's been a bit more challenging. And I also speak from a place of, having my health, having a place to stay. And I know that that's a really real challenge for a lot of folks who are concerned about their own health and their well-being. They're concerned about the health and well-being of loved ones or colleagues, and they're struggling with those things. And so what I'm doing is using the place that I'm situated from, my place of privilege, to be able to support those folks who are in need right now. So the biggest adjustment is being able to bring those things that weren't online, to bring those online.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. With that in mind, Miko, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're hearing now around from your clients in particular? Or what are some of the biggest issues or concerns that you're hearing?
So the biggest challenges that I'm hearing have to do with obviously folks who haven't been accustomed to working online, or working virtually, or perhaps folks who have worked virtually maybe one or two times a week or maybe out of the month, who are now having to do that essentially around the clock, making that adjustment, right? So what are the technical tools that I actually need in order to make that happen, to set my team and to set my staff up? How do I actually manage my team remotely, right? What does that actually look like? So that's one aspect of it, actually getting online. The second bucket of issues that a lot of organizations I'm working with are facing have to do with the social and emotional impact connected to that. So the prolonged social isolation, the prolonged physical distancing has uh, really taken its toll for a lot of folks, right? So you couple that with the fact that many of us are home simultaneously with our partners, with our children, with our pets, and that is adding us a level of anxiety and stress that I don't think was there before, even when folks were working from home. So that's one aspect of it that we're dealing with. And as it relates to this latter part, one of the things that I've been offering as part of the work that I do in general is mindfulness facilitation. So helping folks, guiding folks through mindfulness-based practices to help them to lower their anxiety levels and to address what you were talking about earlier, which is shifting out of the reactive mode. Oftentimes when we are in a state of crisis or panic or anxiety, we're in a reactive mode. And when we're in a reactive mode, we're not able to take a full assessment of all the resources that are available to us. We're not necessarily in the best place to make the best decision given all the options that are available. And the more that we can do to shift out of that place and to shift into what I say, shifting from a mindless place into a more mindful and intentional space, then we can see all the options. We can see all the resources that are available to us. We can soberly look the challenges that we're facing right in the eye and say, okay, I acknowledge I see this particular challenge, but let me figure out, in spite of this challenge that I see before me, what's the most productive way that I actually can work through this? Where do I need help, and how can I get help and support? Where do I actually start to pick up the pieces and to rebuild?
Wow. I mean, you mentioned the support that you're offering or services that you're offering to some of your clients around mindfulness and the exercise of mindfulness. Is this a virtual sort of offering, or are you giving folks access to additional tools that they might have at their disposal to kind of engage in this mindful practice?
It's a mix of both. So this month is actually National Meditation Month, and so for folks that are following me on LinkedIn or on Instagram, folks will see that I've been sharing the past few days, and throughout the month I'll be sharing more about this resources related to mindfulness, into meditation, starting with just micro practices for folks that aren't familiar with mindfulness, folks who perhaps are new to the process, folks who perhaps have a practice but have moved away from it or want to go deeper into their practice. I've been sharing those things in terms of resources on social media and through my email list. The second thing that I've been doing is actually offering virtual facilitation, right? So I mentioned that I do this in person and online. I've essentially moved the work that I've been doing offline online, and for example, one of the conferences that I was supposed to give a talk at, NTEN, the conference put on by the National Technology Enterprise Network, or NTEN, or NTC as folks know it. There were a number of folks that stepped up to offer alternatives to how folks have that online experience. And so I, along with a colleague on the league, helped to facilitate a number of mindfulness-based sessions each morning during that particular online plugged-in conference, so that folks had something to start their day off as they were engaging in the rest of the conference. But they also engaged in a number of different practices around breathing, around understanding micro practices that you can use throughout your day when starting a meeting, for example, starting your day, switching between work life and home life, things like that can be really impactful, particularly given the stress and anxiety that so many folks are feeling right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you and I were talking, setting up to this conversation, we talked about like even some of the work that through the nonprofit that I'm with, we've got a collaboration with an actual service provider that does and offers mindful tools. So
Yes.
Headspace being that vendor. I'm Los Angeles based. You're on the East Coast, but I think actually Headspace is located in LA. I want to say because I just late last week, I saw an article where they've extended the offer to all of the LA residents to gain access to
Okay.
subscription to their tool. We're also seeing this. I mean, I have two younger daughters, ages 6 and 10, and they're trying to adjust to their schooling after post spring break here. And some of the curriculum or exercise that their teachers are offering is access to like yoga/meditation videos to wind down during the nighttime, right? Which is something that as a household we didn't really think of or practice. So I find this that right, like there's a lot of need for it out there. There's tools out there. So is there a way that maybe you can advise in terms of how we can collectively bring some of this information to a central point, perhaps, or just make it accessible to individuals?
Yeah, so I can talk about some additional practices, some micro practices that folks can engage in. And the other thing is, we can make sure folks have access to this maybe in the comments. But if folks sign up for the email list, they go to my website, mindfultechie.com, and click on the subscribe button in the menu. You can join the email list, and you can get regular access to all of the information that I'm sending out with these tools and with these resources. So one of the things that I'll actually be introducing very soon is a directory of all of these applications. So that online conference that I talked about, that was supposed to be at NTC, one of the sessions that I presented on, I co-presented with Beth Cantor on mindfulness and wellness apps and tools. And so I'm putting together a directory with those resources to make those publicly available for folks that might be interested or might be able to benefit from those. In terms of the practices that we can engage in that are small things that make a big difference in our day, starting with making sure that we're building in transitions throughout our day. For folks who have worked in an office and have all of a sudden been being forced to work from home 24/7, essentially, one of the things that we're missing that's contributing to the anxiety and the stress, particularly from a mental health perspective, is that you had your commute time, you had your time where you were at the water cooler or where you were at the kitchen or you had your coffee break. And those things also served as a mental cue for your body to switch context between your work and your home life. And what has happened with the move to working virtually online, for folks that aren't accustomed to that, if you're not building in that switching time, then you essentially are going nonstop, like the commercials that you see for the Energizer Bunny. With the difference being that your battery runs out at a certain point, right? And you know that your battery runs out because you're maybe you're irritable, maybe you're tired, maybe you're hungry because you're skipping meals, or you've forgotten to eat because you're working nonstop. You're trying to take care of the kids, you're trying to walk the dog, you're doing all of those things, and part of it is because you're moving on autopilot, trying to check off all the things, but you don't have those cues that were sort of automatically built into your day to give you that opportunity to switch, to rest, to take a break. And so one of the simple things that we can do is to simply use your calendar as an opportunity to build in those breaks, right? So have a conversation with your team and with your family about when are you going to be available for work, and when are you going to be available for things outside of work, and then put that on your calendar. Put your start and stop time for your work on your calendar. And when you wake up in the morning, for a lot of folks, our indication right now might be, or our inclination right now might be, to actually jump right into work, right?
Right.
And so what I want to encourage folks to do is to actually build in time for you, simply reclaim your commute time and use that time to have your coffee, or to have your breakfast, or to have time with your family or with your dog, to do whatever your morning routine consists of. Maybe that's yoga, prayer, meditation, exercise, whatever that might be, making sure that you're carving that out for yourself. And the same thing at the end of your day. If you have a routine at the end of your day that you focus on to help you resettle into home life, make sure you're making space for that. And one of the analogies that I like to use is for folks that used to watch Mr. Rogers on PBS. Mr. Rogers, when he came in and he was singing the song about "It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood," one of the ways that he switched to being in that mode was he would take off his coat and sweater, right? And so you want to be thinking about those things as you're moving into your day. Something else that you can think about is, in terms of analogy, is, you know, you think about a superhero like Superman. Well, Superman switches back and forth from Clark Kent to Superman, and essentially can be an analogy for your work life and your home life, right? And his indication for that is going in the phone booth and switching into the superhero costume with the cape, right? So you want to be thinking about what's the switching cost, or what's the time you're building in, a ritual that you're building in for you to switch, and what is the actual signal that you have. Maybe it's wearing a special type of socks. Maybe you actually have a cape of your own. Maybe your kids make you a cape and you can put on your cape to switch into your work mode. Maybe it's you sitting down to have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea that signals that you're making that switch. Tied to this is also making sure that you're building in time for your meals, right? So putting your breakfast, your lunch, and your dinner, and your breaks, all of those on your calendar. And that is critically important if you are in a space where you have a tendency to want to get out of bed, work nonstop, and then until you sort of exhausted late at night, and you sort of repeat the cycle over and over again. Putting those things on your calendar is going to do a few things for you. Number one, it's going to allow you a reminder that you actually have to stop and take a break, right? So that's one thing. Number two, because it's on your calendar, it's going to give you an opportunity to reclaim your time proactively in the event that you have a work conflict. And what do I mean by that? You're going to be in a position to say, well, actually, I'm not able to do noon because I have another commitment, or I have something else on my calendar. Or you're going to be able to say, okay, well, I have lunch on my calendar, but I have this other thing that is really important. I still want to have lunch, so I'm going to move lunch around to another block on my calendar, but I'm still going to have lunch. So either way you do that, you're essentially setting an intention to say that this is important to me. I'm making space for it, and I'm going to make time for it, even if I have to move things around to be flexible around my work and home life schedule. So we traditionally think of mindfulness in the formal practice as a seated yoga practice, a hatha yoga practice, or seated mindfulness meditation. And those are excellent forms of formal mindfulness practice. And I encourage folks to engage in those. You mentioned that your organization has a partnership with Headspace where you're offering that. And Headspace is actually one of the apps that we recommend in the directory that I was talking about. But there are other micro practices that you can use to bring awareness to what you need for yourself and making space for those things. That is also mindfulness in action. So that's just one example of many ways that we can integrate that, particularly as we're working from home more.
I love that, man. I just there is a whole lot of little powerful nuggets in what you just shared. So thank you for that. I mean, one thing that I'm like giddy about right now, just because of this dialogue, is the idea of reclaiming your commuting time, right? So,
Yes.
I mean, I'm just sort of speaking for myself. My commute into work is usually about 90 minutes in LA, maybe in many instances, even 2 hours, on the front end and the back end. And so, what I've resorted to in my remote work arrangement now is I'm just available to work. I'm the front end and the back end, right? So
Yes.
it's more available. But I love the idea of just creating space for oneself to right, like just like give yourself an opportunity to be grounded, to be mindful of the work that one is doing, our family, right? Like a lot of us have kids at home, spouses or partners or friends at home in the same situation, right? And so everybody's go, 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 go,
Yes.
go. How do we press pause, right?
Yes.
We're talking about reset, and we'll jump into that, but um, there's a great opportunity for pausing as well. And so, any additional insight that maybe you can share with that, Miko?
Yes. So one of the tools that I use when I'm doing trainings on this, particularly as it relates to technology distraction, is it's a framework, and it's a tool called rules of engagement. And essentially, what that is, it's a simple questionnaire worksheet that you use to have a conversation with your family. Use to have a conversation with your team and your organization, and you can do it as a team or as an individual or both. But it's essentially a series of questions that asks, what are my hours of availability for work? How is it best to communicate if something is not urgent? Is that email? Is that Slack? If something is truly urgent and important, what's the best way to communicate, and what's the expectation in terms of the turnaround time for a response, right? If I'm not available when something is urgent, what what or who should you reach out to in order to get support if the person is not available? And when am I actually going to take time off this quarter, this year, and to actually move forward with taking that time? So this particular tool is a powerful way to set expectations proactively about your availability, and to let people know, okay, Carlos is going to be available from 8 to 6 every day, and if something is urgent during the time that he's available, then here is how I reach him. Right? If he's not available outside of those hours and something is urgent, here's what I need to do, and here's what constitutes something being urgent. And here's what you do if something is not urgent. You send him an email, and he has 48 hours to respond to that email. Setting those parameters for yourself, for your family, for your team, and doing it as a team is a powerful way to lower the collective anxiety that we have about feeling to be on all the time, and to really dispel with this work-related FOMO that we have, or work-related fear of missing out. Right? Like, if we step away from email, we step away from Slack, we're going to miss an important message from our boss, from a client that's going to need us. Well, putting those rules of engagement in place allow you to step away for lunch, allow you to step away and walk the dog, allow you to step away and read a book to your daughter, and not feel like the world is going to crumble apart, and you're not able to be present with your daughter because you are at the same time thinking about, okay, well, what emails are coming through, or what Slack messages am I missing? Setting up the rules of engagement ensures everyone's on the same page. So if you're not readily accessible on Slack at that very moment, then they know how to reach you if it's urgent or if it's important. And you are able to take a sigh of relief and know that if you step away, people will be able to reach you regardless of the level of urgency, and they know what your availability is and how to reach you.
Wow. Thank you for that. So, I mean, I'd like to move on maybe just a little bit into the topic at hand, which is, and all of this is relevant, but the idea of resetting, right? So,
Yes.
I mean, 2020 for a lot of people, this was going to be the year. Like we were
Yes.
gonna, do a lot of big things from a business perspective, on a personal level. So we were just barely into the year, and coronavirus is disrupting all of our plans essentially. Is there light at the end of the tunnel here where we can still achieve some of those goals that we initially set? What so question A, I guess. Question B, where do we start?
Yes. So I'll start with the first part, and you might have to remind me about the second part. So, is it possible? Is there light at the end of the tunnel? The question to that is absolutely yes. And I will share a secret with folks that are listening in on this. Oftentimes, we use the beginning of the year and the end of the year as an opportunity to set our goals or resolutions, our vision for the coming year, and that's great, right? There's a benefit to being a part of the collective energy around that conversation. But that is simply an artificial marker. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that you can do that at any point in your life, at any point in the year. So you can choose May 21st if that's the day that you want to do that, right? So what that means is because of what's happening with coronavirus, that we have an opportunity to do a reset. And it doesn't matter that the year has already started. We can take the opportunity to pause and to go back and to either review if we already created a plan for the year, created a vision for the year. And if we haven't done that work, then you get an opportunity to have a do-over. So either way, no matter which category you fall into, you have an opportunity to move forward. So yes, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And related to this, I want to share that I was doing another interview, and the interviewer asked me, "What do you say to the graduating seniors for college or for high school that are going to miss their prom? They're going to miss the award ceremony. They're going to miss some of the other things that are typically associated with that rite of passage." And one of the things I shared is that, life is full of challenges. There's no such thing as a pain-free or challenge-free life. In fact, if you are growing and evolving, then you're going to have things that push and pull you to your extremes. You're going to have things that make you uncomfortable. And it's in those places of discomfort, it's outside of our comfort zone that we actually grow. You're not going to grow inside your comfort zone, but you grow, you stretch, you evolve when you're stepping outside of your comfort zone. So when you're in a place where you're able to see it from that perspective and you're able to see every challenge as an opportunity to learn and to ask yourself, what is the lesson that I can learn? Then you're able to shift your framing from being a victim of your circumstances to asking yourself, well, I recognize that this is happening. I'm not pretending that this doesn't exist. I'm not pretending that I might not be frustrated or I might be disappointed. I might be having a hard time emotionally dealing with whatever I'm experiencing, but I have an opportunity to take a step back once those emotions have settled and to ask myself, what's the lesson that I can learn? What can I do to actually move forward? So, how do you actually do that? So that's the second part of your question. If I heard you correctly, that you wanted to understand, if there is light at the end of the tunnel, then where do you start? So, the first part of this process is going back to your original vision for the year. And if you don't have a vision for the year, you don't have a plan, then this is an opportunity for you to create one. If you have one, it's about going back to the drawing board. And so I have, and I can share this in the comments, a free life planning toolkit that I've made available. Again, I generally only make it available at the beginning of the year for folks that are planning the year, but because this is a reset, I've made it available again. It's a free tool that's available for folks. And this tool essentially allows you to create your vision. And what do I mean by vision? Your vision is essentially the anchor from which you create your goals for the year. Your goals are essentially metrics that you use to measure how well you're doing with actually attaining your vision. So another way to think about this is if you work for an organization, your organization has a mission, right? So Carlos, if I were to ask you, what's the mission of your organization? Maybe you don't know it verbatim, but you're able to tell me about the work that you're doing and helping folks in California, right? Helping those that are less fortunate and that are underserved. But if I were to ask you about what is your personal mission in life, then for many people, that would give some pause. People may have to think about that. So if I were to ask you that, Carlos, would you have an answer for that? If I were to ask you about your personal mission in life?
Yeah, I mean, I would need to give it a lot of thought, I think, especially given, I mean, just to what you're saying, right? Everything is all systems go right now. And so to pause and give that thought and be able to actually verbalize it in an eloquent way, just personally haven't been able to do that just yet. So,
Yes. And so that is the case for many people.
yeah,
And so that is one of the places that you want to start, because if you don't have a clear vision for where it is that you want to go, you'll end up anywhere. You end up chasing a lot of goals simultaneously that perhaps might be relevant, they might not be relevant. And so what many of us end up doing is at the beginning of the year, we set a lot of resolutions, we throw things up against the wall, we put them in the drawer, and then we just hope things magically work out.
right.
And that is a recipe for um, uh, an inconsistent and inconsistent outcomes in terms of how you're living your life, both personally and professionally. So the first place you want to start, again, is going back to that plan. If you don't have a plan, creating one. In the life planning guide, I walk you through this process, and there are questions that you can ask yourself through journaling or through reflection, meditation. Questions such as, how can I be of service? Asking yourself about in your life right now, given notwithstanding your circumstances, what are you grateful for? Questions that ask you about, at the end of your life, at the end of your career, what will you like to be remembered by? What will be the story that people will tell when they talk about the end of your life and the end of your career? And then based on that, you're able to craft a vision statement or a mission statement that can then guide your goal setting. So then that brings us to the next part of the process, where once you've done that, then we have to have a conversation about, if you already have goals in particular, given where we are, do you need to recommit to those goals? Do you need to reimagine or revise those goals? Or do you need to remove those goals and simply go back to the drawing board? Wherever you are, it's perfectly okay. But in order to assess where you are, you need to first have that vision or have that plan in place. Another way to think about this is, a lot of folks, particularly in the leadership training context, talk about your big why. Why it is you show up for your life, why it is that you show up for your work. And what I say about the coronavirus and this pandemic is, the coronavirus might have canceled, events. It might have forced you to work from home, but it didn't cancel your why. It just changed your how.
Mm,
So if you're clear about your plan, about your vision or your big why, then the question then in terms of what can I learn from this is about, okay, well, if my why is still the same, then my how has changed. Let me understand how my how has changed. So in my case, my big why is centered around serving change makers through the work that I do around mindfulness, technology, productivity, work-life balance. That why hasn't changed, notwithstanding the fact that how I am delivering services has changed, right? The why stays the same, but what I had to examine was, okay, the why stays the same, then if I'm not able to do in-person events, then what am I able to do? What am I able to offer? So I had to re-examine the how. So that is something that I want folks to take away from this. Now, this is also an opportunity for folks, particularly for a lot of folks who have been living on autopilot, suffering from what I describe as intention deficit disorder. So the intention with an I, intention deficit disorder. So this means people are walking through life on autopilot. You are perhaps unclear about your intention or vision or plan for your life. And so if you're unclear about it, what you're doing is you're living your life in alignment with someone else's vision,
mm,
right? So when you're watching TV, when you're watching the movies, when you're watching the news, when you're scrolling through Instagram and you don't have a clear plan for how you're living your life, and you don't have a clear plan for how you're going to set up goals that actually align with helping you to achieve whatever that vision, that mission is, then you are living on autopilot in response to what you see in the movies, what you see on Instagram, what you see your colleague doing, what you see your neighbor doing, right? And so you have to take time to get clear. So for many folks, one of the opportunities is to realize that they weren't living with intention. They weren't living with purpose. And so this is an opportunity to take a pause and to get clear about what that is, and to actually, in that case, you know, start from scratch with identifying goals that actually align with whatever that newly revealed um, purpose or intention or why is for them.
That's interesting. You talk about the why and the how dynamic. Again, sort of like the work that my organization does with again working with homeless individuals that are low income or whatnot. Um, a lot of our staff have been forced to work remotely, not be right, like not coming into our various office locations. So they're either working from home or are most of which are actually considered essential personnel. So they're out in the front lines on a day-to-day basis. But what I've heard people at least in the industry that we're in, kind of speak to this pandemic serving as a rekindling to people's overall mission and why, right? And so
Yes.
I think that's very powerful for something to not get lost in the midst of all of this stuff, right? Which is pretty easy for it to get lost
Yes.
and confused in many instances. In that, right? Like maybe my how to go about it definitely has to be different, right? And so, but don't lose
Yes.
sight of that why.
Yes.
Um, we hear that with folks. I mean, today for nonprofits is Giving Tuesday. And so there's a lot of nonprofits out there doing a lot of advocacy and fundraising to their campaign to maintain business and continue operating as usual. But how they're going about it is different from their traditional sources because you can't have an in-person event.
Yes.
Are there other sort of ideas? I mean, partly is right. We've all resorted to using virtual tools to having, excuse me, ongoing dialogue.
Yes.
Um, but there's at some point, right? Like myself personally, right? Like if it's 8, 9 o'clock in the evening, I'm ready to like toss that phone or that laptop and just like not hear it again, right? And so, how do folks make that transition off of just the reliance of technology? I mean, my mindful techie is geared around this sort of idea of leveraging technology to help with some of this stuff. But there are other instances where there's technology doesn't have to be phone based or computer based, right? And so, can you speak a little to that, Miko?
Yes, I think that's a great question about essentially the mindful use of technology. And with the work that I do, I work with folks on being mindful and intentional about how they are using their technology. And in a context where our screen time is increasing, because more of us are working from home and we're working actually more hours, not less, um, paradoxically. And that means going back to what I was saying about integrating those um, small mindfulness practices throughout our day in terms of taking back our commute time, for example, scheduling our meal times. One of the other things that we can be doing, it's particularly important if you have a family and you have kids, is making sure that you're scheduling time to unplug and to unplug together. And so there are a few things that are related to this. First, it means carving out time where you are clear about when you actually need to be on and when you need to be off, right? So if it's work, establishing your work hours, what that looks like for you, and then giving yourself an allotment as a family or as a time where you're going to be on for purposes outside of work, for personal purposes. Um, but then carving out time where you're actually offline, and there are a few different ways that you can do this. So some suggestions that work for folks, particularly with folks with families, are making sure that folks are putting away the devices at meal times, so having meals together, putting away the devices during those meal times. Something else that folks can do is to, particularly if devices are getting in the way of your quality sleep or you know uh, going to bed on time, is to have everyone charge their devices outside of the bedroom, right? And if you have small kids, particularly if you have kids, under 10, if they have devices, making sure that they aren't going to bed with those devices in their rooms, like making sure that those are charged separately. So those are some simple things that we can do to make sure that we aren't constantly on. And then making sure that you are scheduling off time for offline activity. So as a family, puzzles, board games, perhaps movie night, perhaps cooking a meal together, perhaps some of the arts and crafts activity, taking a walk. There are other ways in which we can be conscientious about disconnecting. Just yesterday, I was talking with a friend who, both of us work primarily from home. We talked about, taking a social distancing walk together, right? So we're going to do the 6 feet apart, but we're actually going to walk around the neighborhood together, right? So that we can both get out of the house and make sure that we are disconnecting, but also making sure that we're also getting outside and getting fresh air. And so those are simple ways that we can be mindful about making space to not only be connected to our technology, because we recognize that it's an important tool for us to be connected and do our work. It's an important tool for us to sustain our social connections. But at the same time, we want to find that balance, right? We want to make sure that because technology is a tool, it's an instrument, we want to be mindful of using it in ways that empower us. And that means sometimes we have to be intentional about how and when we actually unplug from our technology.
Yeah, one thing that we've again sort of like looking to unplug from the tech as a household, at least what we've done is we've adopted this idea of let's go for a walk or a bike ride
Yes.
in the afternoon or evening.
Yes.
And that for us is our pause or our reset for transitioning from schooling and work into just our family time, right? And so
Yes.
it's a brief walk. It's a 15-20 minute walk. We run around the neighbor, walk around the neighborhood. But when we're back, we're all ready to move into the family activities, if you will. And that's proven to
Yes.
kind of be helpful. It's still an opportunity there for like balance in that, in many instances, as you're walking, you're peeking at your phone at a message or something like that. And so there's still work to be done there in that regard, but that's a really good sort of thought or suggestion that you are making.
I think even in that instance that you gave with the phone, I'm fortunate that I'm able to walk to a number of things in my neighborhood. And so one of the things I do is actually, if I'm going out for a meal, or if I'm going out to the grocery store, um, I leave my phone at home. I don't need it, and I think some of us, like I'm old enough to remember the time before cell phones, and so I'm not freaked out by it. It might be a bit of a challenge for some of the younger folks, but um, you don't need it, right? If there's an emergency, then you stop in the shop and they have a phone. You can call, call someone. If you're concerned, like and you haven't memorized the numbers for your emergency contacts, write those down on a paper index card and put it in your wallet or your purse and take those with you. Like there was a world before we had those mobile devices in our pockets, and people were able to go out and be safe and not have a heart attack because they didn't have their phone. So it's a good exercise perhaps to consider, to practice, particularly as a family.
Yeah, I mean, this might be a good, like, somewhat of a segue, I guess, because right, like I think one of your earlier suggestion was speaking to, like, making use of your calendar, and I live and die by my calendar in some instances in terms of just what my activities are, including family time and weekends, and we're just really thoughtful about just our planning.
Yes.
But it's really dependent on technology, right? So it's my phone calendar or tablet calendar. Um,
Or planner.
or planner. Can you speak a little bit about this planner?
Yes, so this is it's called the intention planner. You actually see the different versions on the wall behind me. But it's a planning tool that I created, really I created it for myself initially several years ago because I was looking for a planning tool that allowed me to plan my days and my weeks intentionally. And going back to this conversation that we had about the big why, I wanted something that was going to help me to reflect on my big why, to identify my goals, and then to help me to track my progress toward those goals by making sure that every day and every week the activities in which I'm engaged in, the activities that I'm putting on my calendar are actually aligned with that bigger why, that big vision, that plan. So I created this planner to do exactly that. And as part of my morning routine, it's one of the things that I do that doesn't require technology, to actually plan out my day with intention by thinking about what am I grateful for, what's my intention for the day or for the week, and is it tied to my long-term vision and mission, and identifying what are my key activities, putting the things that I'm not able to get to into a parking lot, and then identifying with the things that I have on my to-do list, when am I actually going to do those things on my calendar so that I have a realistic assessment of what I actually have available for me in terms of bandwidth. And so I have these three different, I have these different versions that are available, and I'll just show you what what the inside of this looks like a little bit. But you see the inside pages. So this is simply what your daily plan looks like. And then I can show you one of the weekly pages. So this is the weekend review and the parking lot page, and you have also an opportunity to create your vision. So this goes back to some of the questions I was talking about earlier, where you can create your vision, and then you make sure that you are mapping your goals for your to-do list for your day and for your week actually to that. So this is a powerful analog tool that one could use. There are different types of planners. So folks can certainly find information about my planner, and I can put those in the comments, or some planning tool, whether it's digital or analog. But the point is that being able to find something that works for you, that helps you to be accountable to that. And then you mentioned on this conversation about analog tools, people, right? So one of the things that helps us to make progress and sustain our progress is accountability, and accountability in the form of actually having people that understand your vision, that believe in you, even if they're not a content expert or a subject matter expert in whatever it is you're trying to achieve in your life, but they are supportive of you. They can create space for you to share what it is that you're looking for and to be held accountable for that. Like if you're writing a book, you want to get a promotion at your job, whatever that might be, people are really important. So one of the things that I hope people have taken from this time that we have is to reconnect and to connect even deeper with the folks that are important in our lives. So our loved ones, family, friends, colleagues, taking an opportunity to reconnect and to strengthen those relationships. And that doesn't necessarily always require fancy technology to do that. At a distance, certainly it's part of it. But if you're fortunate enough to have family that are connected to you, right now where you live, that's an opportunity for you to connect in a way that doesn't require technology.
That's so interesting. The like using your family, your friends, your network to hold oneself accountable to goals and objectives.
Yes.
But that, I mean, given there's at least from my perspective, some leeway, perhaps, I don't know, or rationalization, sorry, of like, right, I don't, because of social distancing, I might not have that, or I might just automatically think that I don't have that person to hold me accountable to some of this stuff, right? Losing perhaps sight at the fact that, to your right, we don't need Zoom to help us do that. It's the old phone
Exactly.
is a good one, right? So how can we encourage or the viewers here, or just people in general around, yeah, definitely keeping in touch with those people that are important to you and will continue to help you drive to goals, and be able to reciprocate perhaps even some of that support to people in our network.
I'm a big fan of starting small with any goal or with any habit. So start with one person that you can reach out to, and maybe with this reset process, maybe you identify someone that you can go through this process with, right? So maybe you're doing the life planning workbook and your friend is doing the life planning workbook. You're doing it together. You're talking about your dreams, your goals, your aspirations. You're talking about where you got off track. You're talking about what your big why is, and you're bouncing ideas about how you need to pivot your how so that you can get to where it is that you want to go. Right? There's strength in numbers, and as social beings, we thrive on being connected to one another socially. I know that that's a bit of a challenge right now, but there are different ways that we can be connected socially, even if we're not physically in the same space. I have two accountability partners that I talk with on a weekly basis, and we connect by phone for about a half an hour or an hour, and I'm essentially sharing how my week went, what went well, what I want to improve on, what my big wins were, what I want to do in terms of moving into the next week or the next quarter. And we're able to provide support. We're able to celebrate one another, to recognize, oh my God, that was huge. You did this huge thing this week, or you did this thing that you thought was small that was actually really huge. I want to help you recognize that and celebrate that, right? And that makes us feel good to be acknowledged, to be recognized, and it gives you the inspiration and motivation that you need in order to continue to move forward. So start small. Identify one person that you can go through this reset process with, and let that be a starting point.
Great, great. What did you call it? So your planner is the intention planner? Is that what it was?
Yes. So this is the intention planner. This is available. This actually available. You can buy it on my website. I can put the link in the comments, and then the life planning guide is free. Put the link for that in the comments as well. And that's just um, a really short, simple, practical workbook that helps you to just do your goal setting and set your plan, your vision for the year, to help you reflect on where you've been, where you want to go, and to ultimately put together your 90-day plan. Because one of the things that trips people up as they do this type of planning is they get stuck in the how of the larger year-long or lifelong vision or mission that they have, and they don't know where to start. And so by breaking it down into 90-day, 60-day, or 30-day increments, it becomes more manageable, and you're able to see, oh, okay, well, if I just need to focus on this one thing right now. Let me do that one thing, and then once I've done that one thing, then I can move to the next thing. And before you know it, you've actually made more progress than you even thought was possible.
Yeah. I mean, before we're gonna get here pretty close to wrapping up, but I think you were touching on it just now. So, just at the risk of asking you to kind of repeat yourself, right? So, if we're gonna move forward in this reset idea, and of course, this dialogue is going to continue on a weekly basis, so there's going to be a lot more to talk about. So, we're trying to, or we shouldn't try to like capture it all here in this one conversation. But if we were to kind of like move forward or from this conversation today and sort of say, okay, if I want to start today on my 90-day plan, what are the top three things that I should be looking, and I'm say top three just for the purposes of saying
Yes.
number, but if there are like just things that I need to focus on now to help me get to the 90 days.
So top three things. So the first thing is, whenever you're doing any type of planning in this regard, you want to make sure that your vision is clear front and center. So if you don't have a clear vision or you need to revise it, making sure you have that, because that's going to inform a really productive 90-day plan. The second thing that you want to do is you want to identify your top personal priority. And what do I mean by that? Oftentimes, a lot of the folks I work with, we prioritize our work sometimes to the detriment of our personal well-being and our home life. And so I urge people to to put their personal priority first and to schedule the time for the professional around that. Because what happens is oftentimes we get really good at scheduling the professional stuff, right? All the meetings and so on. And if I look at most people's calendars, they have the meetings and those projects on their calendar. But if you ask them what's important to them, I don't see yoga. I don't see the soccer games with your kids. I don't see, movie night with the kids. I don't see date night with your partner. I don't see all those things on your calendar. Make sure that you putting those things in your calendar first, because pouring into yourself from a personal perspective is going to allow you to continue to be able to pour into other people, especially through your professional work. Then the third thing is to identify your top professional priority and just start with one. And this is really important because when we have our vision set up, we have our plan for our life or for our year set up, both personally and professionally. We're going to have many goals or many measurements that we're using to see how well we're doing with actually following through on that particular plan, that vision, that big why. But the reality is that we only have so much time and energy and attention to focus on those things. And so we have to make a decision about what we're going to prioritize for the moment. So to prioritize essentially means that we're saying yes to one thing and we're saying no to another so that we can give our full attention to whatever that thing is. So, when you're doing your 90-day plan, making sure that it's grounded in a clear vision, and then start by identifying your top personal priority for the next 90 days. So maybe that is related to your health. Maybe that's related to strengthening your relationship with your partner or your spouse. And then identifying your top professional priority, which may be related to getting a promotion. Maybe that's related to applying for another job. If you want to switch careers, you had an epiphany during this particular pause that you realize that you were in the wrong sector or the wrong space. You want to do something different that you've been putting off for a while. Whatever that might be, identifying just that one thing, personally and professionally, and pursuing those things. And then as you do that, gradually adding the other things as you check off those one things first.
Wow, this has been a really good and enriching conversation, Miko. So thank you so much for taking time today to enjoy, join in this dialogue. Is there, before we go, is there anything else that you'd like to share with the group? Obviously, we'll have an opportunity to probably engage with people through comments. This conversation went
Yes.
live on LinkedIn, so we'll keep it up as a video so people can always come back to it and reference it.
Yes.
And there was a lot of stuff in there that I think we can pull from.
Yes.
And what we can do is we'll share like quick little tidbits on like a 15-30 second sort of intervals for people to just kind of have a walking pick me up.
Yes. Awesome. So in just terms of closing us out, I would just reiterate two things. One, the coronavirus, this pandemic, may have canceled things on the outside, but it hasn't canceled your why. The only thing that's changed is the how. So I want folks to keep that in mind. And then the second thing is, if you're really serious about staying in contact and you want to learn more, I invite people to go to my website, mindfultechie.com. So that's mindfultechie.com, and to click subscribe to be added to the email list. That's the best way to stay in contact. That's the best way to get information about new programs and to learn more about some of the resources that I shared today. So I urge people, if you're interested in staying connected, if this conversation resonated with you and you want to stay connected and continue to be involved in this conversation, go to mindfultechie.com and make sure that you are signed up for the email list. And of course, we want to see you back here during our next conversation, Mindful Techie Tuesdays, throughout this entire month of May. And we look forward to seeing you next week.